Are you new to the reptile keeping hobby? Let's talk about 5 common mistakes new keepers make so that you know how to avoid them. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Zoe, but most people know me as ZA Reptiles. And Lord knows I've made some mistakes in my reptile keeping career, but who hasn't? If you sat there and said that you haven't, I'm calling you out right now. We're human, we all make mistakes. The most important thing is that we learn from them and we learn from each other to help avoid mistakes going forward. So like I said, we have 5 common mistakes to talk about today that new keepers tend to make. Now, why do we want to avoid these mistakes? Obviously, mistakes can have negative effects on the health and wellness of your pet reptile. And obviously, we want to do what is best for our pets. We want to provide them the best life that we can. So it's important that we try to avoid making mistakes. And obviously, if we're keeping reptiles, it's because we love them. So we want to try to give them the best life that we can. So starting off strong with probably the main one, and that is insufficient research. And this is a really important one to talk about because I feel like it's hard to blame a new keeper for this because new keepers don't know exactly what it is they should be researching, let alone what research is trustworthy. You know, you think you go to the pet store and they have those brochure care guides and that's going to tell you how to care for your animal. And a lot of the time those brochure care guides aren't all that great. This insufficient research can lead to things like improper lighting, improper housing, poor diet, and all of these things can lead to detrimental health effects such as metabolic bone disease, which can be affected by poor lighting and poor diet. Now, a great example of this, just using my own personal animals, would be Chalupa, my Uromastyx, and Queso, my leopard gecko. When I got these two, they were being housed together. Not only do they come from completely different continents naturally in the world, but they also have different dietary needs, different UV requirements. So it's important to note these 2 animals required different things. Therefore, they could not have been cohabbed and housed together and still been provided what it is they actually need to be healthy and survive and thrive. So doing plenty of research, and if you think you've done enough research, you probably haven't, and you should probably do some more. Know about the different forms of heating and which is best and how to use them appropriately and safely. Learn about UVB lighting. What is it? Why is it important? What are the different kinds and which kind is best for the species that you're researching? What does this species naturally eat in the wild, and how can that be replicated in captivity? Look at the native range and the native habitat of that species to get an idea of how to replicate that in your enclosure that you are putting together. Sufficient research is going to go a long way, and you want to try to do that research before the animal comes into your care. The second common mistake that some new keepers make when they first get into reptile keeping is providing improper housing. And we can really sum it up into the size and the type of enclosure. Now, it's very common when you get a brand new baby reptile to probably start off with a 10-gallon tank. Now, as much as the animal is small and this might size-wise be okay to start off in, it's very hard to create an adequate humidity gradient or temperature gradient in an area so small. And you want to be able to provide that to your animals. You want them to be able to control their environment, whether they need to cool off, whether they need to get warmer. You need to provide a sizable enclosure that can create a gradient and have a cool side and a warm side. You know, we mentioned material. Obviously, there's a lot of material out there. You have glass tanks like fish tanks or exoterras, Reptizoo enclosures. You have wooden enclosures like a lot of people will build DIY or get from places like Talking Serpents. You have PVC enclosures, which you can get from places like, again, Talking Serpents. Also cages. You have lightweight PVC enclosures with like an aluminum frame like you would get from Dubia or Zen Habitats. There are all sorts of different enclosures out there, and they all fit different needs. They all work in their own way, but they don't all work for every species of animal. Wooden enclosures are personally my favorite, and they work really well for more arid species, where things like PVC work much better for tropical species that need higher humidity. Glass enclosures look nice, but they're quite heavy. So again, it's going to come down to that sufficient research and understanding what your animal is going to need, so you know how to create an enclosure and an environment that is going to be able to replicate that. The next common mistake that a lot of new keepers will make is improper feeding. We have kind of like 3 main categories to focus on. The first one is going to be overfeeding. Overfeeding is probably one of the biggest issues in the reptile hobby. Obese reptiles have become massively normalized to the point where our healthy animals look underweight, when really they're healthy, but we're so used to seeing such obese reptiles that it now makes those healthy ones look ill. So make sure you know how often you should be feeding your reptile, but also how much, what size prey, to make sure they're getting a good sizable meal, but you're not overdoing it. A lot of reptiles don't need to eat every day. We're talking about snakes. A lot of them eat every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, once a month. But a lot of lizards, people will feed every single day, and a lot of them just don't need that much food. And in captivity, the animals aren't having to run and hide from predators. They're not having to hunt their prey, unless of course you're feeding things like live insects. So they are going to be relaxing a little more often, which means they're not burning quite as many calories as they might in the wild. The other thing to go in with improper feeding is underfeeding. Sometimes, you know, you do hear about overfeeding and you tend to play it safe and be cautious and you end up underfeeding. Or maybe you're feeding a snake and the rodent that you chose isn't large enough. So it is very important to kind of understand how much is enough and how often you should be feeding. A tip that is really good is to weigh your animals. If you're starting off with a new animal or you have a baby, maybe weigh that animal every couple weeks. For well-established animals, maybe weigh them once a month, every couple of months, just to get a good sense of where their weight is at and paying attention to their body composition. You know, knowing what a healthy animal looks like versus an obese animal versus an underweight animal. You know, and if you have a snake and its spine is starting to stick out, you're probably not feeding quite enough or often enough. So understanding body composition of your animals and what they should look like versus what they should not look like will also help with that. Also, under improper feeding, I would say feeding the incorrect prey. You know, do you have an animal and you're only feeding it mealworms? Are you only feeding it hornworms? I doubt anyone's doing that because hornworms are expensive, but it's just an example. Know what benefits and what downfalls different prey items have. So you know that information when you're feeding to make sure that your animals are getting a nutritionally complete diet. The fourth common mistake that some new keepers will make is neglecting veterinary care or reptile medicine. There are vets that specialize in exotic animals and reptiles, so making sure that you know where the closest exotic vets are, so that if you need to bring an animal to a vet, you already know who to call, who to go to when you're researching. Research potential illnesses that that animal could develop and what the signs of those illnesses are. That way, should the animal end up with something, you can recognize those signs and get the animal help sooner than later. Also, when you know common issues and things that could happen, you can also put together a reptile first aid kit of just basic supplies that you could have in case of an emergency. Eventually, I'll do a video on a reptile first aid kit to help you guys out with that. And the last common mistake that I see new keepers make, and this is a big one, is not providing adequate hiding or enrichment. Now, this is important because it helps reduce stress, makes the animal feel more comfortable, like we had mentioned earlier. Helps them burn some calories, stay fit and healthy, work those muscles. Also helps work their mind, their senses. So it just will help make them overall healthier. So kind of the basics of setting up an enclosure. You always hear you want a warm hide, a cool hide, a water dish. Sometimes you hear warm hide, cool hide, humid hide, water dish. They get like a couple decorations here and there. Those are like the basics. So when a new keeper sets up a tank, sometimes you see, you know, you've got hide over here, maybe a hide in the middle, water dish. Maybe a little fake plant for some decor. It's a very common first ever setup. Heck, that was my setup when I got my first leopard gecko. And yes, you do want these things, but you also want more. You want to fill the space. The more space you fill, the potentially more active your animal is going to be, because they're going to feel safer. They're going to feel less stressed because there's not these big open spaces. You know, as far as enrichment, that's just adding more things, more plants, live or fake, adding more wood, adding cork rounds, adding driftwood. You can use different puzzle feeders or dog toys in ways that can be good enrichment for reptiles. Switching up their decor and moving things around so that it feels kind of different is another really good way to give them enrichment. So all of those things are going to lead to a mentally and physically healthier reptile. So now that we've gotten through all of that, let's just run through the list one more time to summarize the 5 common mistakes new keepers make. We have insufficient research, inadequate housing, improper feeding, neglecting vet care and reptile medicine, and not providing enough enrichment or hiding opportunities. Hopefully, if you're relatively new to reptile keeping, you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below so we can start a discussion. If you are a seasoned reptile keeper and you can think of some other common mistakes that I may have missed, leave those in the comments below as well. We're all about helping each other learn and grow here. And as always, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you for the next video. Bye!